great privilege to introduce today's speaker. This is a very special man to some of us here today who we call family. Jerry Davis, my son, left to go to the U.S. Navy from here in Johnson County after graduating from Vienna High School in 1978. As you can see when he stands, he is a tall fellow. As his father, Wendell, and I waited for our child's birth, expecting that it was a boy, we were sure this would be a pretty big young'un. And sure enough, he was that from the very beginning, and also a very bright light to us and to all who knew him as he grew. As a young person, he knew that he wanted to go to the U.S. Navy. He was allowed to participate in the nuclear power program offered to him and received a terrific education as he served. I would like to tell you a couple of humorous events that surround his going into the Navy. On a day in November near his 18th birthday, we waited with him at the old Bob White Hotel for the Greyhound bus to arrive and to carry him to his induction station. I can tell you the tears were flowing aplenty, and as the bus drove out of sight, I could hardly see it. Then we get the call a little bit later on. "Hey, Mom, due to the holiday, the place is closed today." So back he came. He did actually leave a few days later, but this time with fewer tears and some laughter. The other incident was several years later after his schooling and his time on a cruise. The ship he served on, as he will tell you, was the USS Nimitz, and it was in dry dock at Norfolk, Virginia. We were able to go aboard ship and to do some touring. I found it very interesting and obvious as we entered the ship, the boat as I called it, often to his dismay, that the brash know-it-all teenager that had left Vienna had learned how to submit to those over him. We were allowed to tour through many areas and eventually got as high as we could possibly get on that little island that sits on the side of the aircraft carriers. He pointed up and he said, "See that antenna way up there? That's mine." When you are in the middle of the ocean with only sea and waves around you, and you go up to work on it, and you come back down alive, you know that God's not ready for you yet. After serving with the U.S. Navy, Jerry worked with General Dynamics, Siemens Corporation, and Entercom. He holds several professional certificates and serves on the Cisco Academy Advisory Committee for Southwestern Illinois College. Jerry and his wife Demetria reside in Staunton, Illinois, and have 4 children and 3 grandchildren. He presently serves as the IT director, and he'll tell you what that means, of Madison Communications there near Staunton. I introduce to you all Jerry Davis.
Yay! Make that higher.
I think the entire county knows my mom. I think she's the mother to about half the county. My sister and I are able to call her mom, and she recognizes it whenever we call her mom. And we're lucky to have somebody who's so loved within the community. I appreciate some of the introduction. No one can embarrass you like your parents. And thanks, Mom. This morning, watching the colors come up the stairs, anytime I see the colors go, it's an emotional thing for me. As a veteran, all of us put our lives on hold, put our personal aspirations on hold, as we served our country. The VFW here going to give taps and the 21 gun salute. Again, a very, very emotional experience for all of us. And it's right that we should feel that way, because these people who are here, these veterans, they represent our freedom. They represent our flag. I actually do have a few prepared remarks. So I'm honored to be your speaker on this Veterans Day. I'm humbled to have the opportunity to thank our veterans for their service, for their courage, and for our freedom. I've had the honor to know veterans who served in wartime Europe and in Normandy, in the Pacific, in Korea, in Vietnam, and in Iraq, as well as those who served during peacetime, if there is truly such a thing in these days. These veterans and retirees live in our communities. They become fathers and mothers and grandparents. You may never know them as veterans unless you ask. Yet, each veteran has a unique story. Stories of bravery, stories of boredom, camaraderie and fear, laughter and tears, stories of sacrifice, stories of the families who miss them, stories of the families who still wait for them to come home. We've all been protected by the line of military service men and women, past and present. Our days of remembrance and celebration for these heroes among us are a precious thing, lest they blend into the background in the face of elections, budgets, bills, sicknesses, and everyday life. My military service lasted just 6 years. I served at Great Lakes near Chicago, I served on the USS Nimitz, and I served at Fleetweather Central near Norfolk, Virginia. My specialty was electronics, and the lessons that I learned, the training and experiences I took with me, have served as the foundation for the rest of my career. As Mom said, I left on a Greyhound bus from the Bob White Hotel just up the road, one October day in 1978. We had an emotional family goodbye, and I was off to St. Louis, where my first military experience was, sure enough, to be sent home because of a mix-up. A few days later, I got on the Greyhound bus again and back to St. Louis, and this time I was off to Great Lakes for boot camp. If you remember, I said on an October day, what I really meant was almost November. You know, life is full of lessons, and one lesson I learned very quickly was never go to Chicago for boot camp in the beginning of November for 2 months. There were days that it was so cold we didn't even march. Believe it or not, though, the military found something for us to do. We shoveled snow instead. Boot camp graduation eventually came in January. The family came up for graduation, and off we went to Elgin for the weekend with the family. Today they call that weekend the 1979 Chicago Blizzard. As we drove through the deep snow on the way back to the base, I realized about halfway that I'd left my wallet at my aunt's house. The car was extremely quiet as we made the trip twice. So I was probably 10 years old when my dad asked me the question that all fathers eventually ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I think he was surprised when I said I wanted to be on an aircraft carrier. I just read an article in Popular Mechanics or Popular Science about the soon-to-be launched USS Nimitz, and I was fascinated by the size of the ship and the technology. Ironically, about 10 years later, I was assigned to the Nimitz. This was 1980. There were hostages in the embassy in Tehran, and I joined Nimitz on station in the Indian Ocean. My job was to repair anything used for metrology. I worked with the guys we call the weather guessers on their radios, satellite imaging, early faxes. One of the radios I took care of was attached to an antenna at the very top of the ship, above the island, at the top of the mast. And I had to climb up there every 3 months to run tests. I used to be afraid of heights. At that height, the horizon is about 15 miles away. The view is breathtaking over the open ocean. Nimitz was always on the move, out to sea, in the yards, preparing for deployment and deployed overseas. Wherever there was an international crisis, it seemed that we were steaming off the coast ready to respond. We patrolled near Iran, Egypt, Lebanon, Libya. When the Iranian hostage raid failed in 1980, we moved close to the coast of Iran to retrieve the helicopter that returned from Desert One. We shot down Libyan planes before anybody knew the Libyans were the bad guys. We patrolled off Egypt whenever Anwar Sadat was assassinated. Wherever there was tension, our battle group patrolled, always close enough to reach with planes, but always over the horizon. In 3.5 years, we had 2 7-month deployments into the Mediterranean and other shorter deployments into the Arctic, the North Atlantic, other locations as well. We made port in Israel, Egypt, England, and several places in Europe. Our planes were F-14 Tomcats, A-6s, A-7s, and the last of the F-4 Phantoms. If you're familiar with the movie Top Gun, you'll know the characters of the fighter pilots Maverick and Goose, and Iceman and Viper, and Kelly McGillis as the love interest. Being on the Nimitz was similar in several ways. It was hot, it was loud, smelled like jet fuel. On the days we weren't flying, sailors could come up and sunbathe on the flight deck, which the Navy called the Steel Beach. However, our day-to-day wasn't very glamorous, and there was definitely no Kelly McGillis. The Navy calls the aircraft carrier deck the most dangerous workplace in the world, and I believe it. Jet blast, propellers, ammunition and missile, fuel and planes. It's a place to keep your head on a swivel if you want to stay safe. In May of 1981, we had an aircraft come in wrong. It clipped some parked planes and plowed into F-14s being refueled. Planes armed with 20mm cannon and missiles. The heroes who fought the fire that night braved an inferno made worse as ammunition and missiles exploded in the heat. At one point, the ship couldn't be steered. 14 shipmates were killed on the 25th of May, 1981. My stepfather, Lyndall Betts, fought in the Pacific. My wife's uncle, Carl Seifs, served with the Wolverines. My son's uncle, Clarence Cox, landed at Normandy and served in Europe. Another of my wife's uncle, Joe Saquetta, landed at Incheon. My brother-in-law, Stanley Penrod, served in Vietnam as a ranger. There are many more stories among us here today. Their stories, my story, and the stories of those throughout American history, including those who gave the ultimate sacrifice, represent our freedom. Each of those stories is a thread in the cloth of our flag, the red, white, and blue tapestry of our nation. Preparing for today, I've had to search myself to think about what Veterans Day means to me, and to think about what it means to others in these days. We use words to describe our service: honor, duty, pride. A veteran is changed forever by their military experience. As veterans, we learn some common things, like how to hurry up and wait. We learn terms like snafu, and we all laugh when we hear about Army intelligence or military justice. And there are some sounds we'll never forget. The sound of a big military diesel, a jet fighter on the catapult, the sound of a helicopter. My son-in-law, James Horn, was in Iraq. He served as a Humvee gunner in Sadr City, which is on the outskirts of Baghdad. For those of you who've seen the movie American Sniper, James was one of the grunts on the ground at that time. They were on the line for 13 months. When I asked him what he remembered the most, he didn't talk about combat or battles. He replied that he missed the camaraderie of his unit. He missed the guys. I've had the opportunity to see and do amazing things during my service. I saw the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I saw London. I saw Florence. I saw Alexandria. And I saw Jerusalem. I had the chance to see Prince Charles, and I had the opportunity to shake the hand of President Carter. But what I remember most are my shipmates, the guys who wore down my patience, the guys who made me laugh, the guys who made me proud. I'd like to leave you with a quote by General George Patton, one of the amazing leaders of our time. General Patton said that war may be fought with weapons, but they are won by men. It is the men who follow and the man who leads who gains the victory. I'm proud to honor the spirit of the brave men and women who have served our country and serve today. They are my brothers and sisters. Thank you.